Well, I'm forcing myself back into work mode. I'm back. Um, a lot of people take weeks and weeks off at the end of the year, and then they drag over to the first of the new year. But we're back. Brandon and I, we don't have time to sit around. We've got big, big staffing issues to solve, big tech issues to solve in the world of tech. And as you know, we've been doing a pretty deep dive into HR tech, and kind of through the grapevine of all the different people I've been talking to, a company had kind of popped up from the past, Talent Rover. And for those of you that remember Talent Rover, they got acquired by a Bullhorn. Well, the brains behind that, they decided to do another, serial entrepreneurs. They can't stop. There's something wrong with serial entrepreneurs. It's a glutton for pain and punishment. And so Brandon's going to tell us why on earth did he continue in the world of staffing? Brandon, you had gotten out of staffing. Most people would think, hey, you just got, the golden parachute. Why in the world would you parachute back in and do more once Bullhorn gave y'all a nice little payout?
It wasn't intentional. It was by necessity. So we so I founded Talent Rover. I started building Talent Rover back in 2009, and like the story there is, I was in staffing and recruiting. I was with Kelly for a while in various leadership roles, and then I got recruited to a company called CV Partners, based in San Francisco. I was there initially. I was doing headhunting myself, and then got an opportunity to take over running tech for the company, and that led to coming up with the idea of all the software that was out there at the time was just pretty terrible, and that was 2009ish. So I started to conceptualize Talent Rover around that time, and then in 2011, after we used it internally for a little while, decided to commercialize Talent Rover, and then it just went off to the races, and we scaled, and ninth fastest growing software company in 2017 from Inc. magazine, and then
That's
sold to
insane.
Bullhorn. Yeah, and then sold to Bullhorn in March of 18. And I stayed at Bullhorn for a little bit, a very short time afterwards. And kind of to your point, once you start building companies, it's difficult to go work for someone else's company, and just a different philosophy of how to run businesses. So wish those guys well. Stayed out of staffing, especially with needing the time away from the cell and all that. Created a couple new endeavors, and one of those was a company called Blueprint Advisory, which was a Salesforce consulting firm. We helped companies build Salesforce-based products, and we also did Salesforce implementations and all of that. I actually recruited one of my top guys at Talent Rover to come and run that business on the day-to-day while I was focusing on other things, and he did that. His name is Greg Simmons. So Greg was the president of a Blueprint, ran the full operation. And then a few years ago, and I'm terrible with actual timing, but a couple years ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, I don't know, something like that, Salesforce approached us saying, can you guys help us win a deal in staffing? And we engaged with them, and Greg led that to try to bring in services opportunities for Blueprint as far as doing implementations and customizations of Salesforce and staffing. And that led to us getting further along with Salesforce saying, let's talk about your go-to-market strategy and how you're going to win in the space. And, it kept leading to the same challenge of what's the ATS you're going to use? What are the staffing and recruiting specific components that you're going to provide? And the only way to solve that problem at that time was you had to use a product like Talent Rover, which was a full OEM solution. And what that means is you buy Talent Rover and you get all of Talent Rover, and you don't need to buy Salesforce independently. So Talent Rover sells the user licenses and all of that. And really what we did with Talent Rover back in the day is we took the Salesforce platform and rebuilt on top of it to build a full-fledged staffing and recruiting system. The challenge with that approach is it never really gave customers the full value of Salesforce. It gave them Talent Rover's version of Salesforce. It also limited Salesforce's ability to sell other Salesforce core products to those clients, both from an integration standpoint, but also from a monetary standpoint, where you're already paying 140, 150 bucks per seat for Talent Rover. There's not really much room left to buy all this other cool Salesforce stuff that you want. So it just didn't work. So through this relationship, with this advisory relationship with them, it led to us initially conceptualizing of having a sort of like a quick start ATS for staffing and recruiting, where Blueprint would just have what's called an unmanaged package, where we install it over and over again to speed things up. And then it was like, wait, there's an actual opportunity here to change how delivering software is done in the space, where I adamantly believe, and I've been in the Salesforce ecosystem for 20 years now, both as a customer, as a partner, building technology companies, all of that in the ecosystem. And I truly think that you get the most value out of Salesforce if you use core Salesforce products. But Salesforce doesn't do everything. So where do we fill in the missing gaps? And that's what we did initially with the concept of the ASYMBL ATS, was let's create a highly flexible, easily to configure, easy to set up, easy to install ATS that's a bolt-on for Sales Cloud, so that staffing firms can run their full business on it and use the full power of Salesforce but still solve the need, which led to more conversations about, there's a product here, there's a different way of doing business here. Why do we have to do complex setups and complicated integrations and all of that? Where's the easy button? So we really looked at this as an easy button of just install it and turn it on and go. So through that relationship with Salesforce even came the name. Salesforce, an executive at Salesforce actually ended up naming us inadvertently, because there's always this, you can buy a full-fledged all-in-one system like a Talent Rover. You can completely custom build your own thing, which is an option, but it's expensive, it's risky, it's time consuming. And usually only the big, huge staffing firms do that. And then there is now this new approach called ASYMBL. Well, what if we just assemble the features and the products you need in order to have your full tech stack on Salesforce? And it was like, well, that's the name of the company. And we started off doing that and officially launched ASYMBL Inc. in January of 2023. We hired a gentleman named James Van Steenberg to replace Greg from running Blueprint on the day-to-day. So James was hired in early 2023 to be the president of Blueprint. So he was building Blueprint. Greg was running ASYMBL. Then comes the end of 23, beginning of 24, we started to see some synergies of, why don't we put these two things together, which we did. And now we're going through a process of actually doing a rebrand, where Blueprint Advisory is now becoming ASYMBL Consulting, because we have this vision of not only solving this type of approach for staffing and recruiting, but for greater business services. So other service industry type companies as well, helping them fulfill their missing gaps on the Salesforce platform. So long story short, to answer your question, I only got back in the space because I was asked to, and the opportunity just made a lot of sense. Like, I built Talent Rover starting in 2009. It's old. The way of thinking is old. The technical debt is old. And I don't think very much has happened with it since I sold it. So I think the whole product is old. And I think just the way of working with software is so different. And I think, especially, we're probably going to talk a lot about the AI stuff, the whole change with agents and intelligence and moving to an era of conversational UI versus traditional UI. I mean, everything's about to change again. And, we've been really fortunate, and we worked really hard on developing such a strong partnership with Salesforce that we have a seat at the table for a lot of the things that are happening, which is doing incredible things for our customers and really helping our business grow a lot.
Well, you brought a lot of things up there. I want to touch on the fact that, one, that you being in the ecosystem of Salesforce, which is known for its incredible CRM features, it makes a lot of sense that CRM then become this great candidate management system, candidate relationship management. That makes perfect sense, because it's a very complex process to nurture and develop some of these great candidates and the talent that you meet out in the marketplace. Not everybody is instantly in the marketplace. They can be, passively looking. And when you've got a really sophisticated and subtle way of nurturing and feeding them the kind of content that they want to learn about the company and the culture and all the different ways you can do that, and then you layer on top of that the ATS side of it. I mean, I think it's genius, really, because everyone knows Salesforce is at the top of the food chain when it comes to, that relationship management software. But then now you've just touched on something else, though, the agents. Now, for people who don't understand what AI agents are and this, upcoming conversational UI, walk people through this, because this is a huge game changer. We're in the middle of redoing our website, and we're already talking about, how do we want to implement and use, chatbots? How do we want to use that to start integrating with our internal database and with our external clients and candidates?
Yeah, I mean, I think a couple of different things before we get into the agents piece, which I'm super excited to talk about. It's going back a little bit to what you were saying about Salesforce and being a CRM. And the way that I've always looked at Salesforce is broader than the CRM. Like the point of Salesforce is to give you a way to really understand the relationship you have with your customer. And I've seen it over the years. I mean, being in the ecosystem for so long, I've seen everything from Chatter come out to when they switched and did Salesforce One, a mobile first approach, to Salesforce Lightning, to Salesforce Customer 360, now Data Cloud and Salesforce Foundations and all of the things. And it's been this evolution of where they're going, and not to mention Einstein that rolled out, I don't know, 10 years ago or something like that. It's been a while since they first started getting into the AI space. What they've always been focused on, in my mind, is being a business operating system of not only allowing you to see the relationships with your clients, and in the staffing world, your candidates and your clients, but allowing you to engage with them. So how do you market them? How do you sell to them? What do you do after you win a deal with them? Meaning, what's the service element? How do you create external engagements with those clients? Meaning, portals is another way of saying what Salesforce calls Experience Cloud. So it's really been, in my world, engagement. How can I easily touch a customer or connect with a customer and leverage a platform to pull that data in so I can visualize it? So that's the history. And that's why I've always thought, for staffing a recruiting company, everything you do is sales. Like, recruiters are sales is everyone's selling,
All the
getting
time.
candidates really
And
good jobs. So it was a perfect.
ABC.
Yeah. Um,
Well, that's always be
exactly.
closing. I'm sorry. I'm thinking
I
Glengarry,
mean,
Glenn Ross, but I mean, still, it's the same idea. You never stop.
hey, I mean, when I started in staffing, I used to sit next to the fax machine waiting for a resume to be faxed in so I could match it to jobs. That's a little while ago, but the world is changing, or has changed, is a different way of saying it, where agents aren't really the same thing as a chatbot. It's not really what we've seen in the past, where there's true intelligence behind what these agents are going to go do. And I talk a lot about digital workforce, digital labor, so much so that on our financials, we have the traditional line items for labor, right? So you're looking at salaries and bonuses and payroll taxes and all of that. And my company now, we have employees in the United States. We have employees through employers of record in Canada and in the UK, and then we have a subsidiary in India, where we have employees there as well. So I've got all different types of labor everywhere, with different types of labor structure and different accounting for those employees. Like the employee of records, I don't have any taxes or any of that. I'm just paying the vendor to employ those people. So when I think about agents and what they do and how they operate, they are a form of digital labor. Like, these agents, you'll go and you'll create a job for them. So think of it like hiring a human. You create a job description, and here's the tasks to be done. This is what your role is. This is how I'm going to measure the success of you in this role, and you're going to do these things. And if I hire Susie to go do, I don't know, keep it simple, a BDR SDR role, where her job is, someone comes in as a lead, qualifying them, helping get them to the next stage, moving them through the funnel. Susie's going to end up working with, whoever the account executive is or the recruiter is, depending on what space we're in. And she's going to do a handoff and transition that. Well, when you start to think about the world of an agent has intelligence. It not only can do tasks, but it can leverage AI to reason and think and figure out how to do tasks. A really good example of it is like writing an email. You can ask an agent to write an email, or an agent can write an email on its own, where it's going to look for data that gives us the foundation of what to write. but then it's going to use a large language model to actually tell it how to write it. And it's going to be able to adapt that email based off of who it's interacting with. So there's an intelligence that's going on there where it makes it act more like a human, more like an employee. So when I start to look at agents in that way, in my mind, with having labor all around the world, in Talent Rover, we had 8 countries where we had offices in. So I really got exposure to labor laws and accounting for labor and all that. I look at it as these are just a different type of employee that have a job, that have a cost, that have a value to deliver for the company. And these agents or these employees are going to interact with other employees. Those other employees are going to be human employees, or they're going to be other agents to get the jobs done. And the people are going to be handing things off, and agents are going to be handing things off to each other. So it's a really interesting dynamic of where tech is, because without all that we've seen with generative AI and predictive AI and all of that that's come, without all of the focus on automation and workflows and all of that, which has been around for a while, with combining all of that together, all of a sudden we have a different thing in our hand, which is why you're hearing CEO of Salesforce, CEO of Microsoft, all of that talk about things like SaaS is dead, digital labor is here, and it's not so much now digital labor replacing human labor. It's how does digital labor assist and partner with human labor to create a whole different workforce that we haven't seen before, which changes the whole game, which is fun for us because we're such a new company per se, even though we've been in the space for so long. Our technology is so new, but yet we've known how to build it forever. We don't have to worry about a lot of tech debt and a lot of reinventing. We're actually just inventing and driving. So it's fun. So hopefully that gives you some insight of agents, but it's really doers, if you will, as an agent that's going to leverage the data and it's going to leverage the intelligence, so like the large language models, et cetera, to tell it how to do it, like their brain, to go execute.
I don't know if you did you ever see the tech series on, I think it was
I
HBO
never watched
Max.
that.
It was Westworld.
I heard of it, but I never watched it.
Because you got to it's wild because you literally, so Dolores is the main character and she's think of
Mhm.
like one of the Optimus robots, that Elon is creating for his manufacturing plants. And put human skin or synthetic skin so it looks like a person now. And so what was interesting, eventually Dolores, I won't tell you the story. It's really cool. You really should watch it. But in a lot of ways, you could witness her operating with the world through all the AI agents that she was sending out. So she needed to do something, and she was negotiating literally in milliseconds the acquisition of all these assets that she needed. And I think that was like the very first exposure that people had to what this, AI agent can do. It's like if I could copy myself 2 or 3, 4 times, then I myself could go and work on a contract with this company, or I could go work on whatever the different tasks are. And that's what these AI agents are going to do. So you said that you've been working with this technology now for a number of years. For the staffing companies that are out there that are thinking they want to start learning how to, ramp up and get into this game, is there a stair step of like a tech stack that you need? Can you kind of walk us through like what that might look like? Obviously, if they don't have it, they could obviously switch over and go into Salesforce and start, in that ecosystem. But if they're not ready to go Salesforce, what's the other
Good
methodology,
luck.
if you will?
And the reason why I say that, it's totally
Is that a
fair.
fair question? So is it
Well,
really
it
not
just
that
depends on where you're
advanced
going
yet?
to go
I
and
don't
what you're going to
know.
buy, and what use case you're trying to solve. So, co-pilots were the big thing
True.
last year, right? And what people realized with the Copilot
Yeah.
wasn't really do. Like you can interface with it, it gives you results, all of that stuff, but does it actually go and do anything? And there was starting to be a lot of fatigue or frustration of, yeah, these things aren't that valuable. And it wasn't until the understanding of, well, what if you take a Copilot, which is really just a prompt to get information, and you connect it with actions, you connect it with flows, you connect it with the ability to actually execute on things. Then all of a sudden you have something very different where you could ask it to do something and have it go do it, or it could just go do something based off of something happening on its own, which is really how agents came to be. And last year around Salesforce's big annual conference, Dreamforce, is when they announced Agentforce. And what they have done that I haven't really seen any other tech company does. That's why I was sort of making a joke about when I,
No, and that's fine because you're deep into this. That's why
yeah, what
I
they've
don't know
done
what
that I
other
haven't seen
options
other
are out there.
companies do is they've actually deliberately created the ability for companies to actually go in and create their own agents and do it in a way where you don't have to understand code. You don't have to be a developer. It's all part of what they call their declarative interface, which they've had for a long time. I mean, they've always talked about being no code and self configuration and all that stuff. So you can actually go in and set up your own agent to do tasks inside of the Salesforce platform with Agentforce. And they did a great job at Dreamforce of getting people to actually at the conference go build their own agent there on site and get familiar with it. So that's the easy path, if you will, because the system's designed for you to create your own agents. Like we're doing a lot of stuff with Agentforce as well. We have the ASYMBL agent suite, and what we have is predefined agents that do very specific jobs that you don't even have to configure them. You just turn them on, and then they also get access.
Hmm. Like you already know kind of what they
Yeah,
are
because
going to be
we have them
typically
work with our
wanting to do.
technology,
Yeah.
and we obviously know our technology better than anyone else. So we create the agent. So you literally just turn it on. Salesforce has predefined agents as well. Like they have their SDR agent, they have their sales coach agent, and all of that ready to go. But the real magic happens when you can take a pre-developed agent and then you can connect it with a custom agent that's special for your business and in your secret sauce, and those things can work together. But I think to answer the question is really exploring the tech vendors to say who have the tech capabilities for me to actually create an agent without needing to write a bunch of code to make it work. The second part of it is that agent is only as good as the data that the agent has access to. And this is like the biggest thing for anyone who's looking at
Exactly.
any form of AI is if the AI, regardless of how what it is, if it can't get to data, it's not going to work. So one of the things that Salesforce has been doing over the years is working on this data infrastructure. And they rolled out a product originally called CDP, and then they renamed it to Genie. They love to rename products. So it became Genie, and then it became Data Cloud. And what Data Cloud allows you to do is basically connect almost any data source into Data Cloud so that all of this intelligence has a centralized place to go to get the data. But they've also done it in a way where you don't have to move data. So if I have a big database in Snowflake, I don't have to replicate all of that data now in Salesforce. The data cloud will do a zero data or zero copy data where it's basically going to reference the data in the other source and bring it over so that you can actually get all the access. So
Is that like an
it's
API
both
interface
API.
where it
There's a
does
lot of
that?
different things behind the scenes that they have plugged in, and there's also they have this product called MuleSoft where you can connect other third-party systems in. But in simplest forms, it's anywhere you have data you can connect to get that data over into Data Cloud that you can then run all of this stuff off of. But there,
They just solved a huge problem with that, if you don't mind me saying, because Brandon, what I noticed is you have all these disparate data
yeah,
centers wherever they are. Like you mentioned, you were working in 8 different countries. So imagine, you know, over time, these little data stores kind of build up unintentionally. So you can then just link everything into Data Cloud, right? And then it's like configured in the appropriate way. It's kind of like building the highway, the infrastructure, and all the, gets rid of all
yeah,
the roadblocks, if you will, to get to all the data very quickly. Because an agent can't act on the fly if it can't just access and resource everything that the client or
yeah.
candidate
And well, if it
just might need at
does, you're
that
probably
moment.
going to have some challenges where it's not doing what you want it to do. The other thing, there's two other points on this. One, I want to talk a little bit about
Yeah.
Slack in this regards, but I also want to talk about the concept of an agent and controlling an agent and having the agent do what you want it to do to tie off to that last point where just like training an employee, you got to give it the information. So we were talking about data, and that's the information. You got to give it the information for it to understand, to be able to do things. But then you also have to tell it how to behave. Do this, don't do this, communicate like this, don't use that word track, be nice to customers, basic stuff that we take for granted with most humans. But just in general, like, how do we operate? What's our vision? What's our values? How do we expect you to interact with the customer? How do we expect you to do your job? How are we going to measure you to be successful in your job? You do all of that with agents as well, and you give them guardrails and topics and frameworks so that they know how to behave, and then they're just constantly learning and getting better and better and better at what their core job is, which is why all of this is accelerating as fast as it's accelerating, because the technology is able to think faster than we are when we tell it specifically what to think and how to think about it. The piece that I think is really interesting, if I was a staffing firm or pretty much any company, including my own, and looking at how do I leverage all of this stuff? Like, this is all great. It seems amazing. Like, how do you make it feel?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, 'cause that's what everyone they're listening to this and they're like,
Yeah,
okay,
yeah, and that's
how
where
does
the
this become
co-pilot
practical?
scenario that I was telling you, that's why it had such a challenge, because it's like, what's the real? It's cool, it's futuristic, but what does it really do for me? And I think this is where you start to see the world change rapidly now, and I think agents are here to stay, and what we're going to be hearing about certainly for the next couple of years a lot, where you have these autonomous agents that can go do their thing, but that not everything needs to be autonomous. You still need a human interaction. You still need a human connection. The human still needs to give directions, and at the end of the day, the agent is going to be updating the human with whatever we want. And how do you do that? And I think fundamentally, what's happening is we're starting to move away from a traditional UI experience. And what I mean by that is an ATS or a CRM. We're used to going into those systems, and there's a set of predefined fields that we enter information in, and we have to record things in a certain way. And being in the staffing and recruiting space, it was always a challenge to get the team to just use the system, because they had their own systems to work around the systems, and they didn't want to have to enter all this data. And I lived experiences with clients at Talent Rover requiring every single field on a page and hundreds of fields, and no one wants to enter it, and they were upset that the data never really worked, and why am I paying for this expensive system? It's because it was just not a fun interaction. It's not how humans typically work. What's changing is how we interact with systems, and Slack is a really good example of this, and it ties into the agents, where I don't know how familiar you are with Slack, but it's perfect.
I use it every day.
So
Super
communication tool,
familiar with
right?
all the
Collaboration
workspaces.
tool, makes it super easy. Slack
Yep.
AI allows you to search for stuff and find stuff, and to recap stuff, and really give you what you need. My Slack channel's super busy, like constant information. So normalizing that, simplifying that, so I can see the messages I need to see and respond to it. In my interaction, in my company's interaction with Slack, is how we work with each other. It is our work operating system, because it then ties to everything. Like, we're a big Salesforce shop, so we can access all of our Salesforce information inside of Slack. And we're doing it in a way where we're not using a traditional a traditional UI, where we're having entering field by field. It's actually pulling in the information, summarizing it, giving us what we need. And this is where I think we go, where if you think about the simplicity of interacting with another person on Slack and getting information you need and being able to find that information later, this is where tech goes. And this is where your interaction with your database goes, where you're going to be able to have agents inside of Slack that also communicate with the rest of the data. So this UI that I'm talking about becomes less field structured, meaning go enter a certain field or a certain piece of data into this field in order for it to show up on a report, in becoming more unstructured data, where the technology can understand the context and what you're talking about or what you're typing, to know how to structure that data on the back end to then do things with it. So the whole point of conversational text or conversations being recorded as data, both in written form, so transcribing it like we've seen for a while now, or from just even speaking and having it understand what you're doing, which if you look at any of the OpenAI ChatGPT stuff, now you just talk to ChatGPT, it talks back to you. Siri on Apple, Alexa, all of that's kind of done it in the past. But now we're seeing this shift to an actual practical business use. So I would look at, how is my technology structured, and what is my technology provider to give me access to all my data, both my structured data, my unstructured data, all of my systems. So not just my CRM, not just my ATS, but I want my email. I want my Google Drive or whatever your flavor of Google Drive is. I want my communications platform, so my Slack, my Microsoft Teams, whatever it may be. How do I normalize all of this data together? And then what does the technology do on top of it? You're going to have different technology. Some of it's predictive, allowing you to predict what's going to happen. Some of it's going to be generative, where it takes and creates new things for you. And some of it's going to be agents, where it's going to take all of that and it's actually going to go execute things autonomously without you to drive the results you want. So when you're looking at technology, how do you check all those boxes? And then how do you get the credibility that it's real and that it works? And do they have customers using it? Can they show you? And then the last piece on it is the trust of how do you trust all of this data that you're now combining is going to be protected, and it's not going to be shared. It's not going to be used to train someone else's model. It's not going to be exposed anywhere.
Exactly. That it doesn't
Yeah.
just flow back out into some
Yeah, where
open
anyone can
AI, open
basically
API
run
or
a
whatever.
search.
Learn
Yeah.
basically
So I would break
from
it down
your,
that way
secret
and say,
sauce.
who checks all those boxes or get me close enough? The other thing when looking at this is don't boil the ocean. Like, what problem are you trying to solve? And find a partner that can actually understand your business and help you identify the problems that you could solve with all of this. But I do think the companies that embrace this are going to see the most value and have a huge competitive advantage. I think the CEO of HubSpot said a while ago, AI is going to compete with how you do business today. And I don't know exactly what, but it was something similar to that. And what I think he actually meant wasn't it's going to compete like it's going to be your competitor. I think what it actually means is it's going to help you compete and do things better than all of your competitors do if you embrace this technology the right way. So it's an exciting time. It's we've got a lot going on with it. We're seeing customers use various different pieces of it. We've got some big announcements coming over the next couple of weeks around all of this. And then Salesforce is definitely pushing it. So when you have Salesforce pushing it, you have Microsoft pushing it, you have OpenAI pushing it. You just have these huge tech juggernauts pushing it, and seeing real success from customers and real ROI. That's a good indication of what's about to happen.
Yeah, and you really encapsulated it really nicely because don't boil the ocean. Just what are the practical problems that are happening in your company that maybe we can solve with tech? And for me, it's how do you put a base layer of technology in that's not going to box you in,
Yeah,
but allows you to grow and scale? Because to your point, once you make those first steps into, and you talked about this earlier, talking about having the data clean, you have to have the right kind of data. Once you go through whatever process you're going to have to go through to make your databases clean and uh, not just configured,
mm-hmm.
but normalized, right? Then you start layering that first layer of technology on it. Then once you see it, then you're confident that you want to keep making investments because you just can't go to your CEO and say, we want to drop X millions. You've got to start small. You got to show the benefits. And then if you pick the right platform, then you can just keep adding. And then to your point, you can just boil more and more and more. But to your point, though, you think a lot of this is already happening now with inside the
Absolutely, it's
Salesforce
already happening. There's thousands of
ecosystem,
agents
clearly.
already deployed and working. It's real. It's here. It is what you're saying, figuring out the data piece, and looking at it a little differently. And the reason why I brought up the digital labor, and even on my business, looking at our financials as these agents are just different types of labor, and we're going to forecast that way because the value I'm going to get out of them is different. A real life example that we're doing, resume search and match is never been super fantastic from any vendor I've ever seen across the board, right? Matching a resume that typically the candidate's not the best at writing the resume to a job that typically the recruiter's not the best at writing a job description. Now you're trying to put those two things together and get the perfect candidate. Like, I've never seen it be brilliant. It's good. There's a lot of advancement with it. It's never really brilliant because that's not really, in my opinion, the secret sauce to finding the right candidate for the right job. When I was on the desk, I loved candidates who had terrible resumes because no one at the company would want to work with their resume. They would think they're not a fit. And I would spend time talking to these candidates, really understanding them, figuring out who they really are and what their skill set really is, and then going to clients and convincing the client of you need to talk to them and here's why, and then making a lot of placements that otherwise you wouldn't make. And a lot of that is more of the interactional type of relationship that a candidate brings. Everything from their soft skills and personality to things like, if they start a temp assignment, do they complete the assignment? Do they get ended early? Do they get extended? Do they communicate well? Do they follow up? Do they respond to your emails? Do they respond to your texts? Like, what's it like working with this person? So what we've been focused a lot on is that interactional data, where I still think matching a resume and a job description is important. It's not going to go away. I think it's still there. But I think when you start to look at all of these other pieces of who is this candidate and what's their skill set really, and when they go for an interview, do they get a second interview? Do they get a third interview? How many times do they get an offer made to them? Will they respond to me? Will they show up to work on time? And then when you start doing the same thing on the client side and looking at a hiring manager that same way, do temps like working there? Do they end early? Does the hiring manager respond? Do they complete timesheets and approve them? And all of the things that are all happening. But when you start to quantify that data and you leverage that alongside of search and match, then all of a sudden you start to get a different viewpoint of who potentially could be a good candidate and a good placement for what job and what hiring manager and why. And then you throw the AI on top of that, the agent on top of that, for the agent to constantly be looking at this stuff and coming to you and presenting, here are candidates you need to talk to, then you're starting to play a different game. And like another challenge I've always seen with traditional ways of managing ATSs and recruitment databases is everyone goes to LinkedIn. Like you have these huge databases of candidates, but you don't talk to them because the data is outdated. I don't know if they're still at this company or whatever. So when you start to have agents pay attention to, well, who have we not talked to in 2 years, and go and see if you can get updated contact information, and go and see if you can find where they're working, and go and engage with that candidate to see if they're open to opportunities, refresh their information along with the resume, present that back to a recruiter, and all of a sudden you're open a whole candidate pool that, your recruiters probably would have gone to LinkedIn to try to figure out.
Yeah, I think we're going to literally have to do another episode one of these times and just do agent. I mean, it's literally, it's incredible all the things that you can potentially do. And I think before we go, I think the first question, the many questions that people are definitely having, but maybe the first one, if you're the candidate, is you might be thinking, I don't know that I want to interact with an agent, or a recruiter might think, what I do really, really well is that I'm so different and unique in the way that I approach people. And I think that's that could be kind of a great place for us to end, because we could just go on and on and on about how the agents are going to interact and how you're going to teach and train them to do this. I think it's fascinating, and I think that might just
because I definitely
a great little hook. You're going to have to come back and listen to Brandon and myself with part 2 to figure that out. Because that's the big red flag. I mean, every time I mention
it goes back to what I said in the beginning.
So
the real magic here is when you think about your workforce, think about humans and digital labor combined, because there's a secret sauce to how you blend those things together to get to where you want to be. It's not one or the other. I think it's both.
It's got to be both. It's got to be both. I tell you what, I've done this podcast for, I don't know, I guess we're going on about 5 years. And I've always tried to avoid what I think is an infomercial, but I will tell you, I didn't think of this as an infomercial. I truly felt that this was like, if there's a company that's out there that is head and shoulders better than anyone else at what they're doing, it's okay to talk about it. And that's my justification in this instance, because if Salesforce is that far along and ASYMBL is that far along,
Uh,
then God bless you. And
yeah, and hopefully from
the
what I
rest
was
of us
saying,
need
it
to catch
wasn't
up.
infomercial, but it was more so how to think about it and what makes it real. Because there's a lot of different options to go with, but the foundations and understanding the foundations is going to help you make the decision of what's best for you.
I think so. And I think you laid out a great groundwork for people to figure out how to start boiling that one little thimble of the ocean. Because once you start, you're going to be hooked. And then you're going to start experimenting. How can we get into more and more and more? Brandon, it's great to see you again. I hope you had a great new year. Everyone that's listening to this, we're at the start of the year, January 2025. Glad you have your health. Hopefully your health, your wealth, and your sound mind. All right, everybody. Thanks for tuning in today.